International Expeditions is pleased to be bringing you this webinar. We're here to talk about Cuba and what it's like to travel now. And here to tell you more, we will start by turning it over to Steve Cox and Emily Harley. Welcome.
Well, welcome, Lee, and thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. My name is Emily Harley. I work out of International Expeditions Alabama office, and I'm going to see if I can't get these slides to advance. Lee, I seem to be having a bit of issue. Oh, there we go. Oh, and I've advanced way too far, so let me jump back here and spoil some of the surprise for you. But this is, again, thank you, everyone, for joining us today to talk about Cuba, which is just an absolutely fascinating destination. I was lucky enough to just go last month, as was April. She was there last month, and we'll be going back to Cuba again next week. And of course, one of the main people who will be speaking to you today is Steve Cox. He's International Expeditions Executive Director. He founded the company 35 years ago. And Steve is a veteran of more than a dozen trips to Cuba, both in planning international expeditions, people-to-people journey, and as part of government delegations before the people-to-people licenses opened up. Again, joining you this evening is April Springer, who's International Expeditions Cuba Destination Manager. She has the enviable task of researching all the new opportunities in Cuba. She'll be talking about some of the different parts of the country that she's gone to on scouting trips recently. And that's a picture of me last month in Havana. So you may be joining us tonight because you've seen International Expeditions and our Cuba programs featured on so many different media outlets. Cuba is truly one of our most popular destinations right now, but the company itself actually has 35 years of experience in putting together engaging travel to more than 25 countries worldwide, lest you think we're only in Cuba. We do have a passion for nature travel, and you'll see that reflected in our itineraries worldwide, but even in Cuba, where most people don't realize there are more than 20 endemic bird species. We do have a focus on conservation and ecotourism and support conservation projects like bringing clean water to Amazonian villages, bringing school supplies to villages in Peru. We work very closely with conservation efforts in the Galapagos Islands, and just a number of projects that really, they're at the heart of who we are. Of course, everywhere we go, we try to use local expedition leaders and guides so that you get unparalleled insight into the culture. And that's really something that we'll talk about in Cuba as well with the guides that we use there. Of course, as always, the hallmark of every IE trip is a small, intimate group so that you don't feel like you're being herded from one destination to the other as you engage with the local people, learn more about the culture. So that's just a little bit about International Expeditions. But we really wanted to take tonight to jump in and just answer some of the most frequently asked questions we're encountering about travel to Cuba. So Steve, you really are just the expert. You're even consulting with attorneys and teaching other people about Cuba and Cuba travel. So I really want to have you address these questions.
Well, thanks, Emily, and hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us tonight. I'm going to just launch right into it. As you may have heard, back in December and in January, there were some changes in U.S. regulations toward Americans traveling to Cuba, and it has made it easier, particularly for us with the licensing process. I was into page 300 of our license renewal when the changes came about. But as far as what you can do and not do in Cuba on people-to-people category of licensed programs, that hasn't really changed that much. There are 12 reasons that you are thought of as Americans authorized to go to Cuba, and the one that we work with the most is called the people-to-people activity category. And that just means it's educational. It means you have dialogue and interaction with regular Cubans throughout the trip. It's not one based purely on tourism. It's a very active thing that engages with Cuban people. So just going down and wanting to go to the beach and hang out and do very little, have mojitos, etc., our government is still not allowing that. Cubans would welcome it, but we are not. So people to people means really engaging with Cubans. It doesn't mean that you're captive, that you're confined to quarters. If we don't have an activity, that's not it at all. You can get out. It's very safe and very enjoyable. So one of the biggest changes, though, is the awareness of Americans that you can go. Before, people may say, oh, no, you couldn't go. It's not legal to go under any circumstances. Now people think I can just get up and go for the weekend. Well, neither one is exactly correct. But we've been doing this for quite a few years, initially in 2003. So we know the rules. We keep everyone out of trouble, and we're looking forward to having you with us. Why go to Cuba now? Well, now you see it in its infancy of tourism. The Europeans have been going, the Canadians go, Americans have just been limited. And the Cubans were a bit surprised, I think, that the rules were relaxed a bit a few months ago, and they are preparing for an influx of Americans. It is better to go now than when it does change later on. It would lose some character perhaps later on, and do it while you can. Now, there are a number of logistical and infrastructure issues that are prevalent in Cuba. There are some really good hotels. There's some great restaurants. There are some very quirky hotels in the interior, and it's not like going anywhere else in the world. So you need to be prepared for a great time, but understand how it is, and we do make you prepared for that. We have a number of questions, I know, that have come in advance. We're going to try to get to all of them, as many as we can, certainly. One of the changes is that you're allowed to bring things back. Before, you couldn't bring back any rum, couldn't bring back any cigars. You could bring art, objects, literature, etc. Now you can bring them back, but in limited quantity. I think you can bring back $400 officially. Art doesn't exactly count into that, but about $100 could go toward cigars or rum to bring back as souvenirs.
Although I will jump in here.
You can do that.
I'll jump in here, though, and just as one of my personal tips, and Steve, I'm sure you encountered this, with that $100 that you're allowed in cigars and rum, I will caution you that it is not common to give receipts in Cuba. It is possible to get them, but if you're traveling, you really, really will need to just ask the cashier and the person helping you for that receipt. And you may or may not have, you may not be asked at customs about that. I was not asked to show receipts to justify what I brought back, but someone else on my trip was stopped and asked to see the receipts on her declarations page.
Yeah. So much easier now than before. You may have also heard that credit cards, U.S. credit cards, are allowed now. Well, on paper that may be true, but in practice, when you go, you still need to take the cash because the technology hasn't caught up. Not all U.S. banks are set up for it, and certainly not everywhere in Cuba takes the credit card. So don't, if you're going now, don't count on having that credit card mean a thing to you down there. You still need to exchange U.S. cash for the Cuban convertible peso in the so that you can make your purchases. You don't need a huge amount of money down there when you go with us, but there are things that you'll certainly want to buy and come back with, so don't Don't go with too little money, but no need to take too much either.
And we also do, oh, I'm sorry, Steve.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, on one of our new Cuba programs that we'll talk about in a few minutes, our Cuba voyage, you are able to use a credit card on board our ship. However, it has to be a credit card with the raised numbers. What you'll find in most instances, the places that do accept credit cards, they have the old imprint machine that takes the imprint of your credit card and then you sign it, as opposed to sort of the swipe mechanisms that we're more used to now.
Okay, great. I noticed a question from someone about, and we're going to touch on this, how safe is it down there? Perfectly safe. Is it safe for former U.S. government officials, Army personnel, others to go? That answer is yes. You're perfectly welcome. The Cuban people are very, very welcoming, and they are excited as all get out that the Americans are coming back, and so you're welcomed in every way down there, and you'll feel really, really comfortable in a very, very short time. So all along through here, I'm going to come back in a few minutes and hit more questions and talk about some of the itinerary. And April, here's your introduction, April Springer, who heads our operations in Cuba and does practically everything that can be done related to Cuba here in the office. April, are you there?
I'm here. Thank you, Steve. Well, I had the wonderful experience in April to get to go down and do some research, see some new places. I spent some time in Holguin and on the eastern side of Cuba. That's something that may be coming in 2016. I also was able to see the panorama, which we will use on our new Cuba voyage at the dock there in Havana. This picture may look like it's 1961 in the U.S., but this was actually April 2015, driving down the streets of Havana. The Cubans are so excited and so welcoming to the Americans that are coming. They really are excited about the potential for U.S. and Cuban relations. Another huge change. I was in Cuba in 2014 and then in 2015, and one of the biggest changes was the food. These paladars, as they're called, or privately owned restaurants, are popping up everywhere in all the cities, and the food is wonderful. And that you used to couldn't say that for Cuba. It used to be kind of bland and plain and dull. But it's much better now. You'll see here I had mashed potatoes, which is something I had never seen in Cuba before. And then on the left, this is the tallest point in Holguin, looking out over the city from the Hill of the Cross. So Holguin is a huge city, but it doesn't really have a lot of American influence. So we really want to get in there and kind of introduce Americans to a city other than Havana. So this picture was from my group tour in 2014, and I think Emily and Steve can both agree with me that the group is truly what makes the Cuban experience so amazing. These people that traveled with me will forever hold a place in my heart because they helped me really experience Cuba. Here, the music in Cuba is amazing. Everywhere you go, everyone is a musician or a dancer or an artist. They are the most talented group of people you will ever come across. It's amazing. And this picture was taken in Las Terrazas at a local school. And these children sang for us and counted in English for us. And they were just really excited to have us there. It's quite amazing what the Cubans have done with the little amount that they have. And Emily can tell you a little bit more about that from her most recent group trip to Cuba.
It was actually funny. I believe, April, when you were coming back from Cuba, I was on my way and we sort of waved in the airport.
Indeed.
to echo what April said, I really wanted to put this photo up because this is the group of people I traveled with, and they are what mean, they symbolize so much of Cuba to me. Not just my fellow travelers from America who were fascinating, intellectually stimulating and engaged, well-traveled people who asked questions about topics I would have never thought about, but made my experience so much richer for it. But I also, here in the picture sitting 2 seats down from me, if you remember what I look like from the third slide, sitting 2 slides down from me is Rigo, our Cuban national guide. And, I think that there is a real misconception that because you have a Cuban national guide with you, that he is there to police your activities and to make sure no one is expressing their real thoughts and feelings. And, quite honestly, and April and Steve, I'm sure, have similar experiences, that is not at all what Rigo did on our trip. He was much more open than I thought he would be able to be, but he was extremely open about life in Cuba, about even things that you wouldn't think they would ever talk to you about, like the Cuban black market for getting his Game of Thrones episodes once a month. He added such depth to our experience. And I think there's a misconception that the Cuban guide is really there to prevent that. And I don't think that you'll find that whether you're traveling with Rigo or Delso or any of the people that we travel with. But as I said, so much of your group makes your experience in Cuba, but not just your group. It's how engaged you are. So, for example, this is Cormacao Project, which is artist colony is the wrong word for it, and I'm sure Steve will explain it better than I do, but it's where artists from all over Cuba come to really hone their craft and then go out into the countryside to teach people in these small towns that would never have live music, live theater. But here, my group was somewhat notorious for asking so many questions and taking so long that every 10-minute stop became an hour. And we really found that sort of everywhere we went. And I know there's a lot of people who think that they don't want to travel with a group because you don't get to explore what you find interesting independently. And, I really think that is up to you. So we had people within my group who were artists and writers, and so they just engaged the artists and writers and, really delved deep into that. And that's something also that when you're in country, your guide can facilitate. Just tell them, hey, I'm really interested in this. And they really will work within the constructs of what we're doing to, if you're a doctor or an educator or a librarian, to bring in that layer of experience for you. We had 2 people on my journey who are very, very serious coffee connoisseurs. They roast their own beans. They're very knowledgeable about the process. And our stop at the coffee farm that the Colorados own, I think probably is a 45-minute to a 1-hour stop normally, April. We were there for 3 hours. We ended up, Alfonso Diego, Mr. Colorado's great-grandson, ended up taking me around and showing me all of his toys. He's just a little bit younger than my own son. Other guests were out with his farm hands, checking out the wildlife, or excuse me, the animals he had in the farm. So really, what you get out of the experience is very much what you put into it, which I think is probably can be said of everything. What I thought really made my experience rich are sort of the things that will never show up in an itinerary. So the picture in front of you is Factoria Plaza Vieja, and they are the only micro craft beer brewer in Cuba. And we're walking through Old Town Havana, and one of the guides knew that someone within my group was a home brewer, and he sort of pointed it out like, hey, so this is Factoria Plaza Vieja. It's the only craft brewery here in Cuba. Let's go. So we go in and we grab one of the waitresses who then went and found the owner for us, and we start learning about how they're importing their hops from Austria, and we, got to sample a little taste of everything. So, again, what you put into your Cuba experience will really help you get out of it, and there's so much that just can't go in an itinerary. The little details, like the fact that you're in Hemingway's home and you see his globe, which was, just a really interesting thing. Or this little video that I have to show off. I guess it's a little bit silly and cliche that riding in a classic car down the Malecon in Havana was a real highlight, but for absolutely every single one of us, it's that throwback, it's that very classic Havana experience. It was such icing on the cake of my journey. And of course, I wanted to show this sign, which is from one of the ration stores. Of course, we all know in Cuba, you have a ration book that determines whether you get, say, 10 eggs a month or how many pounds of rice. And, I think I knew that, but I came, obviously, from an American perspective. So I'm meeting people, and I'm going, gosh, it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon on a Tuesday. Why aren't you working? You say you have a job, and according to the Cuban government, there's very low to no unemployment. But visiting the ration book really sort of sealed in my mind that Cuba is just life on a different scale. So the way the ration books work is, yes, you do have a coupon that says in May you get 10 eggs, but you don't know what day those eggs will be available. You don't know what day your rice or your cooking oil will be available. So the Cuban people, you won't ever see one without a shopping bag. And they're walking around with their bag, and you have to go to the ration store in your neighborhood, in your community, and you have to go every single day to see what's available and buy it right then. Because if you don't get your 10 eggs on Tuesday at 2 o'clock when they're available, they might not be there Wednesday. And if they're not there Wednesday, your family does not get its share of eggs for the month. And that coupon isn't redeemable next month either. So, when you are bound to check the ration store every day, when the state-sanctioned public transportation is basically hitchhiking. It's, again, like I said, it's life on a different scale. And everybody always says, what did you think of Cuba? And for me, I always say, which part? It was such a beautiful, challenging, quirky country, but with probably the warmest people I've ever encountered in my travels. So that was my Cuban experience. And Steve, I want to let you jump back in. I'm going to be on the back end answering some of the questions that have been submitted over on the right-hand side of your GoToMeeting room. But Steve, I'm going to let you take over from here and sort of guide us through a few highlights of our itineraries.
Well, thanks, Emily. I'll do that. You'll see if you look in our catalog website, etc., that we'll have 3 really great, very different, very varied programs that we offer, itineraries. And we'll touch on all of those. But I also want you to know that we do customize programs. If you've got a big group or small group, that is possible to do it when you want it, however many people it is, what length of time, etc. And you would just call me and I would work you through it. So that is quite possible. So we'll just go through and talk about some of our programs. First of all, this area here is maybe the most scenically beautiful landscape you'll see in all of Cuba. Vinales Valley, a small town, but this is where the great tobacco is grown for the great Cuban cigars. But one of the other great things about it, the scenery and that, is that we have lunch at an organic farm that is essentially farm to table, restaurant, a great kind of thing. This is a shot of not even a factory, but where only women are smart enough, capable enough to take these tobacco leaves, look at them, feel them, grade them, sort them, and decide what it's going to be used for, what type of cigar, etc. I will tell you that the remnants that are thrown on the floor, they're swept up at the end and turned into cigarettes. I thought that was pretty interesting. We always
waste nothing.
Yes, waste not a thing, not a thing. So our program that we call Complete Cuba covers a huge amount of the country. Everybody gets to Havana on all of these, but our Complete Cuba covers a great amount of ground. Every trip that we do also, we want to be sure that you have more than adequate music, and the music in Cuba is, for Americans, you know, we all have heard of Buena Vista Social Club, which is not a place, but rather a collection of musicians. And here are a couple of the original ones, and we're taking everybody to this small cafe where these guys are playing in Havana. It's a lot of fun, and everybody enjoys it. So these are items that we all our trips will do. The newest program in our inventory is what we're calling our Cuban Voyage. Now this ship, Panorama, its sister ship we have chartered in the Mediterranean several times in West Africa. It's Greek-owned. It is a gorgeous ship and really perfect for our size of group. You know, we're talking about, in general, we're expecting with singles that we'd be going with 30 some odd people, high 30s. We could go with a little bit more. But because this is such a perfect ship for us, we're offering 4 programs in 2016, and then we'll increase it to maybe 10 in 2017. The food on board is exquisite, but we're off that boat quite a number of times with different activities. The ship, as you might imagine, is sails and motors, and we're covering the central part of the Caribbean side, sailing all the way around the western part, all the way to Havana. And we're 7 nights on board ship. We're an additional night in the beginning in Cienfuegos or Santa Clara, and we're visiting Trinidad. We're going to one of the islands that Americans don't normally get to go to, Cayo Largo. April will be there in about a week or so. Maria LaGuardia on the very far tip of Cuba on the west, a great natural area, beautiful beaches, a lot of good activity there. And then sailing on to Havana, where we'll have 3 nights in Havana at the end in order to do the things you'd want to do in Havana, plus make those day trips out, one of them to Vinales that I mentioned, the slide that has the beautiful landscape and the tobacco and the organic farm-to-table restaurant. We're not neglecting our natural history on it. On Cayo Largo, there's a great turtle conservation effort, and we're going to see it as well. We'll be visiting Hemingway's home out of Havana, just like everyone would do, but it's qualified under our government for people-to-people activity, and the Cubans have embraced it also. And I guess the great thing with 7 nights on board moving, 2 great things. One, you don't have to pack and unpack your bags as we do on some of our other trips, moving from point to point. And secondly, you know, you have consistency in your hotel and your room. And thirdly, you know, Cuba is a very long island, but we can cross it in the interior, so we're able to get into the interior on this trip not just right around the ports. So we have added an April departure date, and we've only announced this fairly recently, and the bookings, the reservations, and registrations are really coming in. So if this is of appeal to you, you really should move on that pretty quickly. And you'll see that one of the programs is over Christmas time, and that is a very high demand time. You can almost not get another person into Cuba, especially in Havana, with a crowbar during that time. So here we've got it all sorted and ready for you.
Yeah, the Christmas departure is about halfway full, and we anticipate after the presentation tonight, that it'll be pretty much full within the next 2 weeks.
Yeah, we think. The program we began Cuba with and really tested it with, some of you may remember Buzz Peavy, our chief naturalist for years and years before he retired. Well, we had Buzz in Cuba doing essentially this program, checking it out and working on it with and sending our first group in 2003. So with it, we have a very healthy percentage of great nature in there. We're seeing the Cuban endemic birds. The smallest bird in the world is there, the bee hummingbird, the trogon, and the Cuban toady. Reminds me of a creme de menthe parfait with a little strawberry or cherry on it. You can't believe this bird really exists and as colorful as it is. So we have a great mixture of nature and culture, music, art, dance, throughout, starting in the east central part of the country, moving all the way to the west, including Bay of Pigs. And we're at Bay of Pigs for not just history, but it's at the location of the Zapata Peninsula, which is the biggest wetlands on all the Caribbean, as well as the Core and Macau project that Emily mentioned, that is like an oasis of live music, theater, modern dance, art in the middle of just practically nowhere. This is the ruins of an old colonial sugar plantation, and the overseers would climb up to the top, watch over the people in the fields. It's all the way through. This is old Trinidad, a 500-year-old city that Americans think, oh gosh, read the guidebooks, we must go to Trinidad. Well, the Cubans say, my gosh, yes, Trinidad, 500 years old, but there's seven cities that are 500 years old. This is just one of the great restored area main Plaza Mayor, but visit this on Complete Cuba as well as our voyage. So I'm just going to zip through on this. At historic Bay of Pigs, this is the Cuban take on the Bay of Pigs invasion with the small museum that they have right there at one of the landing sites. Now, our hotel at Bay of Pigs is on a secondary landing site. Well, I'll show you a photograph of that a little bit later on.
And Steve, I actually had the opportunity to be in Cuba at the Bay of Pigs on the anniversary of the beginning of the invasion, and it was beyond interesting and I guess challenging, maybe being the best term, to see people celebrating that victory, and then to go into the museum and watch one of the newsreel propaganda films dating back from the invasion.
Yep, we have differing views on history with that. Our reason, though, for Bay of Pigs on Complete Cuba, the history part is just very interesting part of it, but we're there for the nature. There's great birds there. The Bay of Pigs is one of the best snorkeling sites you can go to, and we do have an opportunity there. Our hotel is right on the beach, though that beach is not a good snorkeling beach because the water is very calm and no coral, but beautiful white sands. A quirky hotel, though, and I would have to give you kind of an update as to what that means in a Soviet-built hotel at the Bay of Pigs. Corey McCow project right here nearby, musical instruments that date back forever. We gave them a set of drums last year through some of our friends at Intrepid. So we have a limited number of availabilities, but it is still available. So have a look at this if this is of interest. It's 10 days from start to finish. And all our trips here, we are including a night in Miami where we gather and fly out the next day because we still have to go by charter flight. And let me mention that real quick because that'll come up in questions. There will be regular service from U.S. carriers. United says they're going to go from Newark and Houston. JetBlue is going to fly. Others will fly, but that's not now. And it will be months before all the clearances are done. So as it is now, we're doing our charter flights on American Airlines planes, not small, tiny planes. But it would go from Miami, but you'd need to be there the day before, so we're including that. Our art and culture is a heavy dose of that. We do make a day trip to Vinales out of Havana, but music, modern dance, classic dance, rumba, the salsa, about every element, good dose of Hemingway that you can think of. Then we move from Havana. This is one of the old squares in old Havana, famous for booksellers. Then we move out to Matanzas, a province next to it. We actually stay on Veradero, which is one of the original beach areas developed by the Cubans not that long ago. Hemingway's home. Hemingway is just a beloved character still in Cuba, and when you take a look at the home and the rooms in the home like this, it looks, they keep this as if Ernest Hemingway left 2 weeks ago and he'll be back in 2 more weeks. His stuff is still around, his magazines, his bar. He notes that he kept to himself on the bathroom wall about how much weight he had gained, all those kinds of things. They dust his books. There's an original Picasso that Picasso gave Hemingway, just hanging there, a ceramic. Interesting as all that is. So it's quite a good experience. You see here the dates. They're more limited in number than we have on our other programs, but we do have the availability. And oftentimes with our customization, we'll have people who, we just can't be gone that long. We can only be 4 days maybe in Havana, and how can we do that? So don't hesitate to ask us. We'll help you all the way through because we know the rules. I'm going to talk a moment or two about the food, and then Emily and April will join in on it, but that's probably one of the biggest differences that we've seen in the last year or 2 years. As April says, the private restaurants, the paladars, evidence of private enterprise being allowed again in Cuba, they're just popping up everywhere in all sorts of ways. This is particular shot is in Vinales. This isn't exactly a private restaurant. This is more of one of 2 that I'm aware of. There may be a third now, of essentially organic farm, straight to the table where the family's preparing lunch. It's a great, great experience, and you have so much. We do include dinner that night, but who can eat after this? It's unbelievable and just outstanding. But private enterprise is popping up.
About Cuba, Steve, is that big bottle of rum that they put in the middle of the table at every meal. As you can see in the picture.
That is a good point about those drinks. Well, rum is everywhere, and there are different types, and you can sample a lot. But when you have your meals, in most cases, you've got 2 drinks that come along that you choose from. That doesn't count coffee and tea, and drinks could be bottled water or soft drinks or any of a couple of types of local beer, glass of wine in many occasions, some not. But we provide bottled water. That's where I was going to. On board our vehicles, it's not a good idea to be drinking out of a tap down there. It probably wouldn't hurt you if you accidentally brush your teeth and swallow it. But we're providing all the bottled water, and you just carry it with you to the hotel rooms. Now, accommodations, there are 4 really, really good hotels in Havana, and there are a lot of other moderate hotels, and then there's plenty that, well, they're just not really up to speed. But we're always in one of the top 3, I would say, in Havana. When you get out into the countryside, you get into some very interesting things, but they are in the way of hotels, but they are clean, they're comfortable, they're air-conditioned, they're private bath. In many cases, the air conditioning won't look like much, but it'll freeze you out of there if you let it. But some are very simple, like the bottom left at Playa Larga. Others are a bit more elaborate. But you need not fear those hotels. It will probably surprise you, but the hotels that we have on our art and culture and complete Cuba, certainly in Havana, are really quite good. So what we
one thing just to add to that, Steve, you know, almost without fail in my group, everyone said they wanted to see Cuba before it changed. So, you know, with seeing Cuba before it changes does come the lack of foreign investment that would build up these hotels. So you're not going to see the Hilton and the Marriott in Cuba. You do get these, you know, government-run hotels or small boutique properties, and like you said, they are quirky oftentimes once you get outside of Havana, but that's just part of the charm of going to Cuba and seeing the country right now.
That's right. Now, there is foreign investment in hotels in Havana and on those all-inclusive beach resorts, but out in the countryside, it's what it is and where it is, but you're totally prepared for it, and we've worked through this for years. They know us real well. They understand tipping real well. We take care of all that for you, exception of your guides, etc. So Americans, I'll just have to say, Americans are the premier visitors to Cuba in the eyes of the Cubans, and they are trying hard to please, working as hard as they can with what they have. Your transportation, this is a question that had come up within Cuba. They made a gigantic purchase of vehicles from China just a few years ago. So the vehicle sizes with us are always a size larger than whatever our group size is. And group size with us generally on the complete Cuba and is roughly 12 to 18 people around in there. The art and culture, we generally hold that to, 8 or 10 or 12, something like that. When we do special groups, we can handle larger numbers, and we do that for specialty organizations all the time. We had one of our most favorite recent events was classic automobile enthusiasts from the Antique Automobile Club of America Museum. And speaking of transportation, you see these old cars, it is like the Twilight Zone. For real, just out of the airport, you start seeing cars that you've not seen on the road here in the USA for 40 years, and they're everywhere. And we have a great experience with that. They keep these cars running. They keep them in great condition because the rule was if you were a private Cuban citizen back in that revolution of 1959, you were not allowed to buy a new car. Therefore, you could keep the one you had, but that became a very precious commodity. Now, you might lift the hood of this old Chevrolet or Oldsmobile or Ford, and there could be a Toyota engine in there, but it could be the original. In fact, I saw a note today where a Cuban was very proud of his car, and it had 700, almost 800,000 miles on it. I'm sure that's no exaggeration, too. But we have been able to go and see the mechanics that keep these things going. And the Cubans say, oh, Cuban mechanics, they work magic. And indeed, they do. So that's one of the fun things to see, and to ride in one. Loads of stories about those. So we were leaving time to get the questions that came in and that have come in now. What else are we missing, Emily, before we do that?
Hey, Steve. So I wanted to just address a few questions that are coming up. People are asking again about group size, and not necessarily just the maximum group size that you just covered for the trips, but on the excursions, people wanted to sort of know how those are broken down. Now, of course, you're with your IE expedition leader, your Cuban national guide, and then you have local guides at each of your stops. So maybe you'll address sort of how that works logistically to ensure you get a more intimate experience with a lot of attention.
Yes, indeed. If you take our Complete Cuba's example, the one with a good content of nature, when we're in these natural areas, well, we're bringing on board with us people who live in that area who might be environmentalists. One fellow who was essentially a farmer who knows where the bee hummingbird hangs out.
Orlando.
And then in the mountain areas, someone up there. When we're in Trinidad or in Old Havana, we may, depending on the time, bring on the specialist. So there are local guides, but your national guide who is in Cuba meets us as soon as we walk out of the airport and waves goodbye at the end. These are really good guides. If you think about it, they've got the best job in Cuba because they're seeing different people all the time. They know how to navigate their system so that they have great education, many times speak several languages, and because they earn tips in foreign, they just become a very sought after position for Cubans to strive to. So the cream does reach the top on that. So we don't have really issues on too many people and not enough guides because of the local people who come in.
One of the questions that I'm seeing a lot and wanted to kind of touch on from an operational standpoint is people who need assistance, like slower walkers, older guests, and then the vegetarian diet. So I've been running Cuba for about 2 years. Vegetarians are super easy to accommodate. You just let us know at time of booking, and we arrange it with the operator. You'll always have some sort of option at every meal. As far as the pace of our journeys, it's an active trip, that's for sure, but it's certainly not something. I had an 81-year-old gentleman on my tour, and we just took our time with him. He did what he could do, and he sat out when he couldn't do things. So that's something that we can absolutely accommodate.
Yeah, we're not trekking, and we should be just fine. If you have any question at all about the pace or I would say that one of the biggest things would just be to be sure you're watching your step somewhere like Trinidad or Old Havana if you're on cobblestones or something like that. But there are sidewalks, etc. So you need not fear that. Now, Cuba is not friendly toward wheelchairs or walkers, but walking sticks canes are fine. You need to be able to negotiate a set of stairs, and that's just to even get on and off the airplane.
Yeah, absolutely. And to get on and off the bus.
Yep, that's right. And the buses, they range from 16, 24, 36, 42, and even 56 passenger sizes, but quite comfortable and, as mentioned earlier, relatively new. And there are plenty of them. The drivers are outstanding. This is a great job for the driver, too. And the Americans, we're seeming to they want to show us their best. So we're happy to have that happen.
So another question that so many people are asking, I'm going to lump them into sort of one. People are asking about the process for obtaining visas, taking care of your exit departure tax, and then also, of course, they know that Cuba requires special medical insurance while you're in country. So can you address that, April or Steve, and just how IE handles that?
I would be happy to. So we take care of your departure tax. It's included in the price of your charter flight, and we also take care of your Cuban visa. So upon signing up for the trip, we send you paperwork that you complete, and we handle all of the logistics. When you get to Miami, you'll get a packet of information with your visa, your charter flight ticket. Everything is there waiting on you.
Yep, we have someone.
Not something that you can easily get outside of a company such as ours that works with a travel service provider that provides that service to Americans who are licensed to travel.
Yep, we do all that heavy lifting for everybody, and what we do is we ensure, for your sake and our sake and everyone's sake, that everything is perfectly legal with our government, and it falls in line with the Cubans as well. So you really don't have any worries with that at all. And we have someone in Miami, and we do a kind of a group check-in in Miami. It can be a harrowing experience if you're just there by yourself and trying to figure out what to do.
Gentleman who helps us with, in fact, the gentleman who helps us in Miami is on the line right now. So hello, CJ, and thank you for all you do for us.
Oh yeah, yes. Well, that's wonderful.
One of the most recent questions is about the Cuban toady, the bumblebee hummingbird, the emerald. I was there in June. I saw all three of those and many, many, many more. The pygmy owl. We actually have a gentleman that meets you literally on the side of the road and takes you to see the bumblebee hummingbird. And that same day we saw the emerald, and then we saw the toady in Playa Larga. So they're super, super easy to see, easy to find.
Yeah, and I ended up with 16 endemic species. But Sandy, for you, since you were so interested in the endemic bird life, I would definitely encourage you to look at the complete Cuba program, as it's going to be the one with the most opportunity to see those endemic species.
Linda, yes, you should jump on the Galapagos voyage with Boley if you were in Galapagos.
Yeah, and we have a bird list too of things that we have seen in the locations and can share with anybody who wants to, examine it.
So I'm seeing a question about tips. All of the tips to the Cuban guide, Cuban drivers, should be in CUCs. The guides, the expedition leaders that IE sends as a representative should be in U.S. dollar.
Mm-hmm.
We love Boley too.
Yeah, the small tips, talking about that, the things like to waiters, to porters and such, we take care of all that for you. So you're not somebody looking for, one or two CUCs, which is the Cuban convertible peso, the name of their currency that you'll see. Speaking of currency, you do need to take currently, as mentioned earlier, in cash, but there are places all through the country, not just banks, but official exchange bureaus, cadecas they're called, where you exchange your money, and the rate is the same, whether it's a bank or a cadeca, so it's very convenient. And in essence, if you give a $100 bill, you're going to get 87 of the Cuban convertible peso as part of the exchange. Now, they do tax this. It's kind of artificial. The Americans, we get a little, we don't get the great exchange and the tax, all to do with the embargo. But you know, those kinds of things are going to be part of the past, but not yet. The embargo still stands. The embargo is what keeps you from just going over for a couple of days, the beaches and seeing Tropicana and coming back just as you want it. The president can change regulations, but he can't change the embargo. Only Congress can do that. And so the way it's set now is the most flexibility that you've got that you will ever have had in the last almost 50 years to go. We expect it to be the same, and then expect someday that embargo is lifted. But you know, it's all political, so it could go the other way. You never know 100% for sure, but that's why you still need to plan and be careful and work with some qualified provider, as you know, as we are, with experience on it.
Now, a few questions that I kind of want to group together. So in terms of programming, would you call the Cuba voyage more of a cultural and arts trip, a bit more of a complete Cuba where you're seeing a little bit of everything, or an environmental ecological Cuba? Is it a bit of a combination? We have some people who are asking some fantastic questions trying to determine which of these Cuba programs is right for them. And then secondarily, which trip is going to be the best for kids, especially kids who have gone to the Galapagos and really enjoyed that trip?
Well, our voyage, our Panorama Cuba, does have some of everything in it. It's not just all one thing, and you've got the advantage of getting an island that would not be out there otherwise. But if you are more into the natural history, then the complete Cuba it's one of the best trips to Cuba that exists from any American organization. I think it's the best because of what all it has, because in it, with natural history, we're actually staying up in the mountains and also staying in the far west in a valley surrounded by mountains. And but it doesn't neglect the music and the art and the general culture and the history and the architecture. So it is, I mean, it's complete. We named it that because it really, really is. You have a variety of accommodation there. You have a variety of meals in really good restaurants. Whereas when you're on the ship, it would be more consistent all the way through. And it has that good nature in it, but could not have the extent of the nature element that complete Cuba would have. And with kids, gosh, they get so much out of everything that I don't know that there's a wrong answer for kids. I don't know if that helps.
Oh, that's perfect. So we are right. Just a few little questions that I'll tick off the box. We've been on more than an hour now, so we thank you for your time. We're happy to stay here and ask a few more questions, but I will just encourage you to please give us a call at 800-633-4734. Visit our website at ietravel.com to find more information. If you wanted to put in a brochure request, we do have a new brochure on our Cuba programs mailing next week. Or, of course, you're welcome to contact Steve, April, or I should you have any additional questions. So we'll just jump in and answer a few little sort of yes-no questions. Can we bring home coffee beans? The answer is yes. I brought home several bags myself. You can buy them in Havana at various stores, but they're actually bought. Mine was at the farm we visit owned by the Colorado family that I referenced earlier. We spent about 3 hours at their house. They gave us, they gave us homemade peanut butter candies and coffee, and they were just so generous with their time. In fact, one person on my trip actually bought the harvesting basket that they wear while they're out picking coffee beans. So that was fun to try and watch them get back through the airport. Can we use American credit cards is a question that's been repeated a few times. And April and Steve, we talked about this earlier. Of course, everyone always says, oh, we'll be accepting them next month. But if you wanted to just cover that again really quickly.
Yes, don't count on it because you may not find any place that it would work. I mean, even in Havana. So just don't count on it yet. Let's let it get underway. And then, not every place accepts a credit card of any kind, much less one that's through a U.S. Bank. So credit cards are just not ready yet. The technology is not quite there, and the ability to do anything with it is still lacking. Just take the cash. Take American dollars that are crisp, clean, not torn or marked on. Change them into the Cuban currency. When you leave, you can change them back into U.S. dollars at the airport on a one-to-one basis, so they don't hammer you twice. But you don't really have to exchange a whole bunch at once anyway, because the exchange bureaus are spread all across the country, and you'll have ample opportunity.
And you can absolutely take Canadian dollars, euros, but I would just suggest that you check the exchange rate prior to taking them, because there have been times when the Canadian dollar wasn't worth as much as the U.S. dollar. But you're absolutely welcome to bring whatever you want to bring to exchange.
Yeah, that's right.
And as far as the best guidebook for birds, Steve, do you recall the name? It's called, I've bought several of them. I should know this.
Well, there is a Birds of Cuba, but I'm not sure it's in print up here.
There's one you can get on Amazon in English. And in fact, I've bought it for several of our expedition leaders to have with them.
Yeah.
While you're looking that up, I believe I got cut off. Someone was asking about weather in the summer. Now, IE does not operate any trips to Cuba from July through September, because of hurricane season. But, Steve, is there anything else you wanted to add about weather?
Well, I've spent the entire month of June one year in Cuba and most of July. And happily, it's air-conditioned in most everywhere that you go. But you just think of it as if it were almost South Florida. You do have some breezes, not so much in Trinidad, which is blocked by mountains, but we're staying up in the mountains. So I think hurricane season is the biggest factor to consider. Otherwise, I mean, it can be really hot in August and early September, but if you're talking about mid or end of October
really hot
all the
in
way
May.
through, yeah, it can get hot again in May.
Someone also has asked about the stability of the electricity, and I know from my personal experience, there were times of the day when there was no electricity, but it was a very, we shut off the electricity at 2 o'clock in the morning from 2 to 6. But the only place I know or that I remember, specifically us not having electricity and it sort of just being a rolling blackout, was actually in Havana.
See, the only place I ever experienced it was Playa Larga.
Yeah, same here at Playa Larga, and it's just because it is very remote. And the town, my experience without the electricity in Playa Larga is because there was some truck that hit a power pole and knocked it out for the town. So that was an unusual experience. In general, it's not a big issue, though it does happen, but not not often that it's a problem.
And again, a lot of that was sort of like we talked about, the quirks of Cuba as it is now. In many of the places outside of Havana, water is brought up by wells and then put into sort of the cisterns that feed the various hotels. So the hotel may tell you, oh, we're going to shut off water for 2 hours while the pumps and the wells are refilled. But again, that's, you know, just sort of rolling with it. And if you have a great attitude and stay flexible and just realize that that's part of seeing Cuba as it is now, you'll have a fantastic time.
We had a candlelit dinner thanks to a rolling blackout. It was lovely.
We had a gorgeous candlelit dinner at an old home in Old Havana with violinists and lobster and fantastic food and candlelit. And if you hadn't told me it wasn't on purpose, we wouldn't have known.
Mm-hmm. You know, all the hotels have televisions, by the way. That, thinking of that, I will tell you a funny story about technology in one of the really most remote hotels you'd ever find in Cuba. But it's got a television, and in the hotels they'll have CNN and oftentimes ESPN, South America, and you'd never think it. One hotel, very proud that of all the amenities that it would have, including telephones in your room, etc. But you go in your room, yes, there's that telephone, but there's not a wire to it, not hooked to a thing. So it's just funny things. There's nothing that really just makes for great stories, but nothing that makes for terrible difficulties. But it's a lot of fun. Cuba is a lot of fun to go to and very educational, and I would encourage people to do it while we can.
Well, I'll jump in here and once more thank everyone who came on tonight to learn about Cuba, to find out more, who asked so many great questions. I encouraged you to ask questions, right? That's how you learn. So thank you so much for joining us. Steve and April, if you have any comments, please let us know. Otherwise, we will sign off.
There was one question that I think kind of got skipped over about cell phones, disposable cell phones. So your U.S. cell phone is not going to work in Cuba. It may somehow pick up a stray signal, but there's no telling how much money that would cost you, so we always just put it in airplane mode.
I had 4 bars of service the entire time I was in Cuba, but couldn't make a single call.
Yeah, because that call might would have cost you $200. But there are cell phones that you can buy at the airport, if I remember that correctly. Steve, can you shed any light on the cell phones?
Well, there are, here in the USA, companies that will rent you a cell phone that works in Cuba. But if you don't really feel like you have to have it, our guides will have a cell phone. We'll buy minutes so that we can always be in contact. You're not just totally lost. The internet down there is just ancient and very slow. There will be internet availability in the hotels, but you may spend equivalent of $15 for an hour, but be able to check maybe 3 or 4 emails in the course of that whole time. So just don't be feeling like you must be connected. But for emergencies, we're available, and people can reach you, and you can reach out anytime at all.
We absolutely have dinner in the private homes in Playa Larga on the Complete Cuba program. I'm trying to think if we do it on the Art and Culture program. I don't believe we have a private home.
Yeah, we do, and in Havana, there's always there. In fact, as the time goes on, it's less and less of the any state restaurants and all private restaurants. Some are actually in homes, as you were talking about. Others are homes that are modified as restaurants.
Yes. You'll find that quite a bit, where they've moved their family to the tiniest part of the home so they could use the rest of the home for a restaurant.
Mm-hmm.
And typically the family members are there sort of milling around, they're helping serve, or the kids are just, running around making you laugh. And then they'll grab you and take you and show you around their home. And, want to show you the pictures that they have of family members.
Undoubtedly,
so really
someone is a musician and is going to play you some music and make you dance to the conga line.
You will hear Guantanamera and Besame Mucho more times than you care.
And Guantanamera.
Okay. Well, I guess that covers it as I think of it.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. And so many of you have asked, yes, this session is being recorded and it will be available on our website most likely by the end of the week. And our website, again, is ietravel.com. If you want to go straight to our Cuba programming, it's ietravel.com/Cuba or Cuba Voyage or Cuba Art and Culture. They're all accessible right there at the same URL. So thank you so much.
We thank you for being with us, and with that we will say good evening and conclude our webinar.